Welcome to another of the Virgin Valley Historical Society's Founders Forum. We're doing this in honor of Mesquite Days that we do every year, so this is just one of our events. Last night we had our bake-off, which we featured bananas, and we have the winner who won first place with us here, Sam Reber, who won the event with a wonderful banana split cake. We will have a float entry in the parade Saturday, and right after the parade, we'll be having historical walking tours around the town. It'll start at the museum. So probably 11:30, 12-ish it will start in the area of the museum. They'll last about 45 minutes, so you're all invited to come down and take a historical walk. Tonight, we have a special program of an aspect of our history that I don't think we've touched on before. Darlene and Sam, who are in charge of the Founders Forum now, decided that this was the time to do this. We've asked tonight Kelby Hughes and Kelly Jensen to come and speak about the cattlemen on the range and historically and the families that did that, and Sam Reber, who also came from a family who was involved in that, is going to be our moderator. So we're just going to turn it right over to you, Sam.
Thank you. This is kind of a soft spot in my background. I've been here all my life, and most of the industry through the years, older people in town, the first settlers, had to have a way of making a living, and they went along with the livestock industry. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the mountains where they ran the cattle on the range. And here in the Virgin Valley, the range went all the way from the Virgin River Gorge up here, all the way around the Arizona border of the mountains, and down along clear down to the lake. And it's the Littlefield Mountain and the Bunkerville Mountain. The Littlefield Mountain, the highest peak, is 8,300 feet. It's called Hancock Peak. And the one in the Bunkerville Mountains is Bunker Peak, and it's 8,300 feet, or 200 feet, just a little shorter than the one over here. So anyway, tonight we're going to ask Kelby and Kelly about their grandparents and their dad, and then they ended up running cattle on the mountains. Kelby, who was your grandfather that run cattle?
Granddad was Elmer Hughes, who was one of the first children born here in Mesquite when Mesquite was settled. Anyway, we've been around a long time. So,
what do you remember about the cattle industry that your granddad had?
I remember when we first, as a little boy, my granddad run cattle in the Mesquite allotment, plus he also run cattle with the Littlefield in the common. He run in both areas. In the Littlefield side, it was called the Littlefield Common Cattlemen's Association. Then it went to the Mesquite Cattlemen's Association. And I'm not quite sure how far down that went, Kelly, whether it went to... Turn your mic.
My dad had from the road to the White Rock there, the cabin, and then it tied into what they called Sheepcock Dud Spring, and then it went into another common group below Riverside and on around Kelby.
But I believe even before his dad had that, it was into his granddad, and it was all common originally in those areas. And I remember, when I was just a young kid, was taking us up on Black Rock Mountain where we ran, and the old rock cabin. I don't know how many of you out there can remember the old rock cabin up there, with those from Littlefield, with the Littlefield, the Rebers and the Petersons and stuff. And my granddad helped build that old rock cabin. That's up there today. Then eventually he got out of the cattle business and was in the store business and that. And then I grew up. My dad in the 40s late 40s bought the Gold Butte range out there that now is kind of a hot issue of trying to make it a preserve or whatever they want to try to do out there. But I grew up out there all during my younger years, up through till I was in my early 20s. Then we sold out, and then we went along from there to clear into '95. In the year '95, and I went back in and bought an allotment in Littlefield Cattlemen's Association, and I ran there for 15 years or so, and then I just sold out a year or two ago.
What kind of cattle did the older people start out with? What breeds did they use? You remember?
Well, yeah, my grandfather, John Jensen, he run Herefords.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, I think he had, well, at the time, the drive that I was in, we drove him to the mountain in the summer. There was probably close to 200 head of Hereford. They weren't as big as the fat-fed ones back on the plains, prairie. They were smaller cattle adjusted for the, you know, the type of environment they ran. But I remember we had to, the old movies used to have, they'd always have a dipping trough where they'd run those cows in to dip them for lice and ticks and stuff. I remember doing that with that herd of Herefords.
Mm-hmm. Who were some of the people that were involved in, Kelly, in your, that you can remember running in common with your granddad?
I don't remember too many of the, I was quite young when my grandfather was running those, but he, I don't remember who ran on that. Well, it was Pulsifer, I think, had Bill Pulsifer.
Bill Pulsifer.
Yeah, and Hardy.
Leo Hardy.
Who had the old Lazy L Motel, the Hardy Motel? Jack? Was
Jack,
that?
I think.
Jack, yeah, Jack. He run cattle with that.
And that was back probably in the 40s and 50s, maybe?
Yeah, late 50s.
Mm-hmm.
Would have been when I'd been involved with them there.
Tell us about some of the canyons you ran in, both of you. Kelby, start with you.
You know, I remember as just a little boy, I mean, 4 or 5 years old, going out to Gold Butte when we had that range out there. And I remember, read the old stories about Bill Garrett and Art Coleman, who were buried out there at this time. Their graves are out there. He was still alive, you know. Of course, he didn't die till 69. So anyway, I remember sitting with him in his old camp there, and those stories about him telling about the things. And this Bill Garrett was a nephew to Pat Garrett, who was the one that killed Billy the Kid. So he come into this country. He was sent into Mexico to bring back a bunch of cattle that had been stolen over there. It was the Texas Rangers sent him over into Mexico, and that's how he got into this country, and to bring back those cattle. And he got over there and got in a skirmish, and there was some bloodshed, and he come back out of there, and then rather than stay in Texas, he feared for his life. He ended up in northern Utah, and then from there he went on to be a world champion cowboy, rider, bronc rider, and trick roper, and anyway, eventually he worked his way in 1916 to Gold Butte, and there he stayed there and run cattle and horses until that Taylor Grazing Act come into effect in 1934. And that Taylor Grazing Act brought everything into common to where the government was involved in all these allotments. And so what they did is they made it so those that was near allotment got to run their cattle. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't overgraze the range, or there were some stipulations put on them there. They just couldn't keep putting cattle out there and doing what they want. The numbers were taken care of, and the government was involved. And then they had what they called Section 3s involved in that deal, to where a Section 3 is they had to own patented ground or own ground to be able to run cattle. So somebody from somewhere else just couldn't come in and bring their cattle and feed when the feed was good and then take them back out. So that Section 3 was either a piece of ground or whatever it was. In my case, in the latter years in the Littlefield allotment, my patented ground was the waters. I owned the waters along with my partners.
Yeah, most of them in those days had a little farm here in town, and they had to raise enough feed for them in the wintertime, so they had a little hay and pasture, and once they had to come off the mountain in the fall, they'd bring them down here and feed them in the wintertime and have enough feed for them, and then in the spring, when the grass started to grow and again on the slope, they'd start going back up the slope and then eventually ended up higher up in the mountains. Tell us about some of the ponds and springs. You're talking about the water. Where did they get their drinking water up there in this dry country? Go ahead, Kelly, tell us.
Well, my grandfather's range went, and whoever else was with him on that was from Cabin Canyon there, White Rock, up that canyon, and actually went up and then clear to the top of the mountain up through Oak Grove and Cedar and
Wiregrass.
Wiregrass was on the other side. That belonged to another outfit, but went right down the top of the ridge of the mountain, down to Nickel Creek, and then came back down through Dud Spring and Seeps, Sheep Trough, we called it. And anyway, took in that area there until he bought into the lower with the common Dan Waite. I think he bought his permit, and that opened us up down all the way around to the lake. There's a hand spring in there. There's little water all the way around, and there seemed to be enough. I don't know if you ever been to the up above Bunkerville where the old railroad car tank. My dad drug that up with a D9 Cat. He worked for Paul Lewis, and on the highway I don't know if he did it all one night. I didn't see him, but he drug it up there. And I don't think he wanted anybody to see him. And anyway, we plumbed that in, and that upper hen spring probably only made 3/4 of a gallon. And I know I worked on that line for quite a while to get that water in there, and then I didn't get back up there for probably a month. And when I went back up, I was totally surprised to see that tank clear full of water. I didn't believe there's that much water on the mountain.
Yeah, that's probably what, 15, 20,000 gallon tank?
I don't know if it's
a
that
pretty good
big,
size.
but
It's a big tank. I was up there not too long ago on a 4-wheeler ride, and that's the base of right by Pod's pasture. Your dad used to call it.
To the right, there's Pa's pasture, and that's made into a pasture by 2 ridges of mountain. The top of the mountain, anyway, the ridges that run in there, and my father used to run his mares up there when they'd fold, let them fold up there, and then colts would learn what a cactus was and rock was pretty fast, and so they made real good saddle horses after they'd run up there with their mothers for the summer too.
I think Rod can kind of remember one time your dad and mother were cutting cattle up there, and they had them in a corral, and your dad was he was weaning the calves to sell them as roping calves to Swanee Kirby, a cowboy producer, a rodeo producer. And he asked me to go up and haul a load of calves back with my trailer, and Rod was just about a 16-year-old boy, and he was supposed to be helping your dad cut the cattle, and he had a whip in the corral there, and of course those cows with the calves being weaned was a little mean. And Rod had had enough, and he jumped the fence and started down the slope. And your mother was on a horse, and she said, "Melbourne, just leave him alone. He'll be all right. Just let him go." Meb says, "I'll catch that kid, and I'll whip him with my lariat." And he started down through there, but Rod's, he's here tonight, and he's long-legged, and he beat his dad, and his dad got tired chasing him, so he turned around and rode his horse back and we ended up cutting the cattle. But that's a story that he probably remembers.
I remember that too. Yep.
Okay, good. Kelby, tell us about Sullivan Canyon. Did you run cattle down in there at all?
Yeah, we had our fence line bordered with Blake, Cecil Blake at that time, and his sons, and we went down into the bottom of Sullivan, and the fence split down in there, and that was a dirty place to go when those cows get down in there, you know.
Yeah, that's a steep canyon.
It's tough to get them out of there, and the brush is thick. And years and years ago, Reber took a cat down in there and made a trail. So we get down in there and get out, but as it got along in years, that trail got washed out, and then they made it into a wilderness area. So you couldn't take any trucks or cats or anything back down in there. So it's still there today, but it's a rough sucker to get down in there and get out. Anyway, Sullivan Canyon, and it runs all the way, and it comes out right there just below Cedar Pockets. On I-15 going through the canyon. I remember I didn't do it, but my brother went down through with a bunch of Boy Scouts one time, and it looked like it was just a little ways. But about 20 miles later, they made it to the river.
And it wasn't too bad, probably going downhill, but try to walk up through there. Yeah. I walked a little ways one time, but not very far. Yeah, that's a deep, steep canyon, and the cattle sometimes would get down in there, and it was hard to get them out.
Feed was good down in there, and there's water down in there, and we even had some, even on bad winters, we always had a few winter down in there, you know, so it was a tough deal.
Okay, I remember one time going on a cattle drive from up the slope above what they call Scenic now. We started at the river, and it was Clifford Peterson and Jay, and I think Clifford's boy, Melvin, one of them. I don't know whether Louis was there or not, but anyway, we drove them from there up to the canyon there, Elbow Canyon, and put them in the corral one day, and then I came home, but the next day they were going to put them on up on the top. And there was, what was it, Cougar Springs?
Yeah, Cougar Springs is up on top. Cougar Springs is just a little ways above that old rock cabin, right up just before you go on over into Black Rock. That's a pretty good spring. Another story about driving those cattle up there all the time. You know, we did it every spring, and then every fall we brought them back off of there. But before I was involved in up there, Dan Reber always told me the story about Afton. Afton never would haul his horse. He'd ride home. He'd ride it from a little field up there, and if it's going to work cattle, and he'd ride it back home. He never would haul his horse. So it was kind of interesting to me.
I remember one time I was talking to Vern Frainer, and he said that he had 3 or 4 cows in his little pickup and a horse, and they got to fighting as they were coming down the slope there, and the horse jumped up over the top and broke his windshield out on his pickup.
Yeah, there's another story about Vern too. He was at the old rock cabin one time, and he had this little black dog, and he was ready to come home, and he couldn't catch him. So he had his pickup parked there, so that dog went up the road, so he went up the road and tried to catch him, and he come back, and the dog run back towards the pickup, and he picked up a rock, and he threw it, missed the dog, but he broke the tail light out of his pickup.
I'm sure there was a lot of wrecks. I remember one time my Uncle Leonard had cattle up there, and he wanted me to go up with him with a load of cows, and we left here, and, you know, he was getting older, and he shook a little bit, and he put his hand out on the window there, his left hand, and he was driving with his right hand, and I says, Uncle Leonard, can't I drive? Well, he says, you could, but I'm doing okay. And we got about halfway up through Elbow Canyon, and he was in second gear, and he should have been in first gear, and his truck quit. And we rolled back up on the hill a little ways there, and I was afraid we were going to tip over. And, of course, that's a steep, rough road. And we got stopped, and he said, maybe you better drive now.
Yeah, I come off of there a time or two with Leonard, and one-handed and the other, and, you know, he had the shakes with that one hand, and he drove, and that's the fastest, scariest ride I've ever had off of that mountain. And he made it, but that was my last.
You know, as you go through the years, they were all lucky that they didn't have more accidents than they had with animals and pickups and flat tires and wrecks. And
yeah, speaking of wrecks, I remember my dad, you know, telling the story. I was probably too young, but in this old pole corral up there, halfway up the slope, going up towards Limekill there, they had a few cows in there, and he went in there and he had an old gray horse named Maybell. And Maybell was kind of an ornery old sucker, and he had a big high-horned cow in there, and my dad roped it. Well, that corral was consisted of 2 round corrals, and then right in the center had a gate between them. So anyway, he roped this old cow, and Maybell bucked him off. And this old cow was on the fight, and there he was in that round pole corral, and they're made out of those cedar posts, and you can't get out of them. You know, and they put a cable around the top, and they got all them cedar posts sticking up. And so he laying there on his back, and that old cow turned and come back towards him, and Maybell, she bucked off into the other corral, and here this old cow coming snorting and blowing at him, and he let out a few adjectives about old Maybell. I won't repeat them. But anyway, old Maybell got within about 5 feet of him, and that cow got within about 5 feet of him, and that rope come tight. Maybell had her tied hard and fast, holding her. And he changed his tune about Maybell. Maybell, you're the best horse I've ever owned. You son of a gun, hold her there, you know. But that's how fast things can change in the cow business or the horse business either. So,
Kelly, tell me about Whitey. You had a horse that your mother rode a lot called Whitey.
Yeah, Mom, she grew up on the Arizona Strip.
Push your button.
Oh, hello. My mother grew up on out to Mount Trumbull on the Arizona Strip and run cattle down into the Colorado River, and she and one of her brothers usually would be sent down there at when they're early teens, and they didn't have fences, so they had the human wall to keep pushing the cows down to keep them in there. And anyway, she was quite a cowgirl. She could ride and rope. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Dad worked in Vegas, and there's a guy that had this white horse. He wondered if Dad could re-break it. It had been broke, and so he said, yeah, I'll ride it and bring it. He told him to bring it up, and I knew we had troubles when he got there. He had this really nice, fancy horse trailer, and my dad wasn't home yet, and he told me he was coming to help him, and anyway, he was trying to unload this horse. This horse kept running away from him, and he'd run out in the desert around Las Vegas, and he'd take him a week to find him and have him saddled on it and everything else. Anyway, he had in this horse, really nice horse trailer, 2-horse horse trailer, and he's trying to get it out, and the horse, he wouldn't even hardly put any pressure on him to back him out, and he just wouldn't back out. And so he got a lump of sugar and put it right underneath his chin, so the horse would have to duck his head and step back to get that sugar. After about 5 lumps of sugar to get him back out of there, I thought, boy, this horse is going to learn something when my dad gets home. Anyway, we got it unloaded, and that Saturday, Dad told me to take Kokomo. He's a big, strong horse, and take him a lap around the place, which was just under 100 acres. So I walked him around the first time. Dad said, no, gallop him around, lead him, and took him around. And he said, well, take him around one more time and open him up. And so we run around it the next time. And anyway, my dad, I cinched him up to the horse. My horse I was on, Kokomo, tied him tight, and he got on, and he didn't buck or anything. We rode together down around and back, and the horse acted just like he knew what he was doing. Well, the problem was when this guy would stop and drop his reins, this horse would take off without him on it or whatever. Mm-hmm. I don't think he knew how to ride was the problem. But anyway, his problem was he would run away. And so Dad took 2 lariats and tied them together and put one around his neck and put the other around a cement post that was in the ground, and brought him over to saddle him. This is a day or 2 later, and anyway, when he stepped in to get the saddle, the horse took off. And so he took off right after him, running as fast as he could after that horse, yelling, and swinging that horse blanket, and that horse hit the end of that rope, 2 ropes, and just flat out slammed on his back. And he stood up, and he never did run away again. Well, he did one time when I was deer hunting. I about shot him, but but anyway, that horse would follow you anywhere, and the guy never did come back and get him. I guess he was glad to get rid of him, not have to feed him. And so my mom claimed him, and you had to beg her to ride him. He was the softest riding and easiest leading horse. I came off the Mormon Mesa down through them rocks. He followed right behind me every step. So anyway.
I remember your mother on that occasion when your dad was chasing a rod here. Your mother was riding that horse.
Yeah.
That was a nice horse. I remember one time I went up the mountain deer hunting with Leonard Reber, and he had a little horse called Billy. And he rode a big buckskin horse, and we were up on top of Heckel, and we were coming down through the mountain there after we'd been hunting, and it was rocky. We were coming down through Middle, and I told Uncle Leonard, I said, I'm going to get off. I said, I'm afraid this horse is going to fall. And Leonard said, don't you dare. And that horse had hit a bunch of rocks and he'd slide, and it scared me. He said, let me tell you something. It's better to have 4 feet under you than 2. And so I stayed on the horse, and of course we made it down. But you know, you kind of fall in love with horses when that's the only transportation you have. I know your granddad used to drive the cattle from his place on Riverside Drive across the river and clear to the mountain. And he used to tell me, I never got on a horse until he was 2 years old. And he said we'd ride it from here to the mountain, and by the time we got up there, it was broke. And that's what horses need, you know, is a lot of use. What type of grasses and feed did the cattle eat? You know, we talked about the water, and now they had to have something to eat. Do you remember any of the names of the plants?
Yeah, you know, the cattle would eat about anything in this country that adapt, you know. In the spring, there was a lot of fillery, and they'd come out and bloomed. And my dad always said that any cow, when the fillery was really good, especially out in that Gold Butte country, and I think up along the foot of the mountain on this Bunkerville range, fillery come everywhere. And he says that they could put on more weight in those 30 to 90 days than anything any grain could, and you could almost cut it with a fork.
Yeah.
Brush, you know, there was a lot of brush, burl brush. They eat mesquite beans in the summer, you know, when the mesquite beans come on. Even on the river, you know, when the tamarack finally come up, them little tamarack, the young ones that eat those, the old salt cedar, they wouldn't. But, it's funny how these desert cattle did in this country. You look out there in that country somewhere, and you wonder how they survived. And whatever was there is what they ate. And they adapted to it. And you bring something in, you know, you bring some new cattle in from somewhere else that was already raised, and they'd starve to death.
Yeah.
And it just the way it was. So I don't know, Kelly.
Like Kelby said, the good thing about cattle, I don't think there's anything else that you can run in that type of country and produce, you know, 400 or 500 pound calves to wean and turn it into red meat that people can eat. Renewable resource, the grass come back, the brush, but it's like Kelby said, cows eat a little bit of everything. And so it doesn't matter so much what season it is. If the grass is come and gone, they'll eat the brush, they'll pick at everything, and they can turn that into red meat.
So I think up north probably have what they call cheat grass and crested wheat and stuff like that. That's probably not much of that around here, but I've heard that it takes one combination, was it 1,000 acres for one cow? And that's probably about true in this country.
Well, I don't know. There's times that you'd think that for sure, but there's times when you can run a lot of head of cattle out there, When it rains at the right time and the right amount, it'll grow more feed than you have cattle to eat them.
That's one issue that we've had in this country with, especially with again, you know, in '76 they rewrote the Taylor Grazing Act a little bit, and then again in '95 they had a final ruling, and to protect the springs and protect these riparian areas and stuff like that, and they tried to adapt this desert area to what maybe it might be in Oregon or up in Wyoming or somewhere else, and they never could get it. In my opinion, they never could get it quite right. You know, it seemed to me like if they'd let the cattlemen, the old-time cattlemen in this area, run their cattle the way they should run them, that they were a lot better stewards of the ground than maybe meddling with us sometimes. So.
Well, they were out there with the cattle, and they knew what they were eating, you know, and they knew what kind of condition they were in, and they would rotate them from one pasture to another. I served on the Soil Conservation Board of Directors in Arizona for a few years, and we had to go out by Jacobs Lake, and the Richies out there own that lodge, and they run cattle. And they had down off the canyon there was a lot of sandy ground, and they called it the savory system. They made the ranges and fenced them in like a pie shape, and they'd put the water in the center, and then they rotate the cattle, and they'd rotate them when the feed was high and had gone to seed, and the cattle would tromp the seed into the ground, and then when it rained, they'd start to grow, and then they'd move them. They rotate them around this pie-shaped pasture type thing. So, you know, the old-timers knew what they ate and where to run them and what times of the year to put them different places. I know they used to count them. BLM later on would come and they'd creel them and count them as they took them off the mountain and different places. And I would imagine at one time with everybody that run cattle on the Littlefield Mountain and the Bunkerville Mountain, there were probably maybe 2,000 head of cattle or so. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it was very easy, that many at one time.
Yeah.
I know my permit alone, you know, it was Vernon Frainer's old permit, which went back to his dad to I can't think of his name now, but Alfred, you know, he had 1,800 AUMs, you know, which was 300 and some odd head, just him alone. And I know my granddad had that many up there. And then I don't know what the Littlefield boys had. They had a bunch, you know, that was all on the Littlefield allotment at that time.
Explain to us what a AUM is.
AUM is that's how many
animal
units it takes to run a cow. You know, so you know it takes 12 AUMs to run a cow for a full year. So, but anyway, I know at the Go Butte, you know, when I finally sold out here a couple of years ago on the Littlefield range, I'd put it all together except two, and that was Dan and his uncle Jay. And I had 2/3, and they had 1/3. But when we finally sold out, we were only, at that time, there was only 220 head or 230 head total on that whole mountain. So that was they cut it that far.
Yeah. Yeah, the BLM tries to run it, and sometimes they are not too sure how they want to do it, but...
And I know down on the other end, I had 100 head permit, even though I never did ever put any cattle down there with Kelly and Calvin Adams, the Toms and them, and Clive and Bundy. There was 500 head total in that allotment out of 5 of us. I believe that's what they had there. And 4 of us sold out, and Cliven's still there. So.
We'd like to know a little more about how you identified your cows. Brands, earmarks, ear tags. Tell us a little bit about that. Kelly, what do you think?
Branding, definitely, and earmark, and then later they went to tags in the ears. But yeah, they brand you have your brand registered with the state and brand your cattle, and That's how you kept track of them. And
We did bring some brands here in front of us of some of our own brands. I brought 2 books there. One's the Arizona, all the brands registered in Arizona, and all the brands is registered in Nevada. The book's pretty thick.
Yeah.
And everybody had their own brand and their own, yep. That's the Arizona book.
When they asked me to kind of talk about this, I went to the library and here in Mesquite and tried to get a brand book. And what I was interested in was the oldest book that they had. And they didn't have anything here at the library, but the gal got on the internet and she ordered one from the state of Nevada up north. And this book that I have was printed and started the brands in Nevada in 1923. And then I was talking to Tuffy Ruth, and he gave me a little book here of brands from Arizona, but it goes back to 1926. And so, anyway, I looked up some of the brands in this book, and I thought I'd have more because of those old timers, you know. But there's a lot of brands in there, but the only ones I could find was Calvin Adams on page 56, number 11. He had a brand. Fay Levitt recorded a brand. Leo M. Hardy recorded a brand, and Vernon Bud Hardy and Max Hafen. And then David Bundy had a brand in this book. But anyway, I'm sure there was others, but they stopped printing this book in 1973, I think it was. And so anyway, it's kind of interesting to collect these old brands and see what kind of marks they had.
That brand that he's holding up now, that's what they call a freeze brand. It's made out of brass.
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is they use liquid nitrogen and freeze it, and then it turns the hair on the horse or the cow or whatever you brand it turns it white. So rather than burn it in, it just kind of deadens the hair, and it just turns it white, kind of like my hair. I've been branded. Anyway, that's the way it is. And then the other one there, that one he's holding up right now, that's what we call a running brand. A lot of the old cowboys had those, and they, on their back cinch, they made a little pouch, and they slid that down in there. Back in the days when they all run in common, it was if you caught a cow and a calf out there together, you know, because you run in common, the corrals are a long ways apart, you could build a little fire and rope that calf and brand it and identify it to that cow.
Yeah.
And that's one that's available, and then that's the old fire brand there he's holding up now that went into the that was my dad's brand, Open A Lazy V, and his name was Archie, and my mother's name was Ann, and we always said she was the Open A and he was the Lazy A, but he didn't like that very well. But anyway, and that was our brand, and then Kelly will have to tell about that one, or somebody. I don't know whose that one is.
that's KJ Connect on the right rib. Yeah. I thought them running irons were illegal.
Well, I'm sure. I'm sure. Well, they use the. I don't know. I think all of them guys still. I see some of them still pack a ring on their saddle.
Yeah.
Huh? I don't know whether. Are you riding with the ring up there?
No.
Oh, okay. I'll just check it. He's riding for the church, and we're just wondering.
Yeah, I had to throw it away.
But and then the one on the end here with the electric is most of us has got real lazy today, and that was my brand. It's called a Diamond Eye, and you have to have either a generator or a power source to run that. But I kept it hot all the time, and it was kind of an even brand. It kind of made so you didn't quite burn them quite so bad. So blotch it, I should say. Anyway, Sam, you might have to tell us about that.
I got those from Richard. Some of those came from that's the...
Is that your dad?
That's Grandpa Jensen's brand, the Rocket J. And there's a couple other there from out at the... What's the ranch there that by... it used to be... it's the ranch east of Nay's Ranch, Bunkers.
The old
What's the guy that used to have that, just passed away?
Jones, Myron Jones, or?
No, the other one, he just passed away. No.
Oh,
Well, we have some Donnie's and Chuck's that are there on the board. I was trying to find some brands, and so I remember a bet night. Go ahead. Okay. You need a drink of water or something? Okay. That's no problem. We're about through here anyway. You need some help?
well, the elevator's there.
I haven't been over, but I didn't know what his problem was.
Here it will.
Here's
Yeah,
one right
here's
here.
one.
Here's some water that hasn't been opened. Here's some. That hasn't been opened. Yeah, I don't think he'd be home, mister. Barely got home. Well, there's so many there, I'd jump up, but I... They made it all right. Well, at least there's a lot of new people there today. There's a lot of new people there today. They said he's in bad shape. I thought it was a stent, but it's a pacemaker.